It is not like the world has really cared about the average man. It is not like the elites have almost always had the people in mind. But there are climes and there are countries we could ordinarily look up to. As bad as situations are, there are countries ordinarily that still champion reading, that still champion the cause for literacy, that still believe in the sense of education. No matter how bleak and no matter how brittle such ideas still stands in the world, it still remains that there are people who are still struggling and championing the right cause of education. It's been more than 6 decades since Chinua Achebe published his Things Fall Apart, and ever since then a whole lot of persons have come out to write different stuff. A whole lot of persons have come out to churn out different articles at different lines of thoughts and introduce ideas familiar to us and sometimes not so familiar to us. But then at the crux of it all is the fact that up until now, up until the 21st century, up until this period in time in history, we have not come to really get our literary agencies and our publishing right as it concerns our lives in a continent such as ours. And one begins to ask what ordinarily has been the hindering block, what ordinarily has been the key hindrance to seeing to it that publications are made available for the common man. The economy of the continent, but also the economy of individual countries and the level of commitment given to other things and the priority not so given to academic publications. The culture of the people that still maintains the survival mode also is a thing at the forefront of seeing to it that literature hasn't really come forward to the people as they ordinarily would want to have it, as ordinarily they would want to have us come to believe. And so we continue to see that things continue to be the way they are, because one begins to ask himself in the 21st century, where people have come to know the power of the written word, the power of the spoken word, our level of creativity is still kept at bay, is still kept where it is, and so we find creatives getting to die. We find people who ordinarily have a thing to say nothing. Meanwhile, those who have nothing to say are full of passionate intensity, and there's this misappropriation of interest and place where things ordinarily should be. And so you find a thing like the National Library of a thing like Nigeria still a thing to be dreamt about, just still continually being in the dream. This was a project ordinarily had way before someone like me was born. And in the last 20 years, nobody ordinarily can account for the project going down there. Nobody can account for what ordinarily is the case. And it's not as though the library is not even in a very strategic place. The library is in a place where if you live in the Federal Capital Territory, you barely can avoid. It's just opposite the national mosques. And so one begins to ask himself, is it the case that those who go to worship in these mosques every Friday don't get to see, and every day, if you want to even put it, don't get to see such a building and the need to get to fix it? The National Library also is standing at a place where you can drive directly to the presidential villa in the Federal Capital Territory, and one begins to ask, is it the case that the convoy that gets to pass around that area don't get to ordinarily see the need that such a project should be completed? If you even want to stretch a bit further, just further ahead, you get to see the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs, I want to believe, is a man that travels around the world and he sees what other countries are doing, and he sees how people are prioritizing books and education and making sure that they mitigate the things that ordinarily make literacy redundant to people, and then champion literacy and as such reduce their forms of illiteracies. Is it the case that these ministers and these people who work in such a ministry don't get to see? And if that is even too much, you turn to the other side, you find the Ministry of Education down there, and you ask yourself, is it the case that nobody is actually looking at the library? Nobody is actually looking at the fact that we need that library and we need it very fast. And we don't only need the library in a particular location. We need the library across the length and breadth of the country. We need libraries in our houses. We need libraries in our homes. We need things to really function. We need to nourish our souls as we try to nourish our bodies. We need to educate and give our mind a fresh start each day or each week, depending on the level of chance we get to have from a thing like capitalism and a thing like the different business models we've come to invent for ourselves in the 21st century, things that ordinarily get to prevent us from ordinarily having time for ourselves. We are so busy working from Monday to Friday and sometimes even throughout the weekend just to put food on our table, just to get a level of security. And so a thing like reading, a thing like research, a thing like sitting down and taking a bread and catching your own bread becomes a disaster, becomes almost a luxury very few persons can afford in the 21st century. And we call ourselves so civilized, we call ourselves a progressive generation, a generation that has placed so much attention and interest in making of money as opposed to the things that ordinarily get to matter. I call it catching our bread because we have to catch it, because we lose our bread during the week. We lose our senses. We lose ourselves in the course of the week. We lose what ordinarily should give us peace, what ordinarily should give us calm. We break ourselves. We leave ourselves sad. We leave ourselves angry. We leave ourselves do everything wrong than the necessary things we ordinarily should do. So what I mean by wrong is we do things out of proportion. We do things beyond the measure we ordinarily should do them. But that is what our current generation has sold to us. That is the idea we've been sold, and we either keep up with that or we lose we lose our senses, or we lose ourselves, or we lose the things ordinarily that get to matter to us. We lose our house, we lose our place in a university if we don't get to pay school fees. We lose our accommodation contracts if we don't work enough to get to pay for our rent, or if we don't continually get student loans to get to see that we get to function well. But at the same time, we also still come to the fact that after getting these loans in foreign countries, we still ordinarily still have to look for ways to get to pay them out, and hope sometimes that we get benefactors or we get scholarships that ordinarily would not demand our pound of flesh, just like it was done in Shakespeare's work. And you ask yourself these questions because the ministries responsible for this, I want to believe, are not blind to the fact that we need more libraries, that we need more grant, and we need more research materials, and we need more people writing. I don't want to believe the Minister for Education, for instance, doesn't know of the plight of the reading culture in a place like Nigeria, or he doesn't know the fact that the level of illiteracy down the country is so high in relation to the continent. And if he doesn't know that, I want to ask myself, why would such a person be called a Minister for Education in the first place? But that might even be the case. That might even be the case that the Minister for Education, in relation with whatever meeting they get to have at NEC, might not even be presenting the issues to the president. Maybe I'm just saying, maybe I'm not there. I don't work with him. I don't know what they do. But it's a very, very laughable thing that in the 21st century we will still be looking for books. If you look at the life of somebody like Malcolm X, if you look at the life of somebody like Ben Carson, you get to see the level in which they attained, the level they attained in life. And you ask yourself, if they never came one-on-one with books, how their life ordinarily would have been. If someone like Jeff Bezos, if someone like Elon Musk never encountered books the way he did, if someone like Steve Jobs never encountered books and actually sat with books, read books ordinarily, how their life would have become. It's a thing that I sit down and I have this mental picture and I cannot really figure them and look at their life outside them reading books, outside them coming to embrace this culture of reading. Because what would have become of the life of Ben Carson? Would we have ever come to hear of such a man and the genius that ordinarily was hidden in him, but not brought out simply because he never really saw a chance to get to express himself the way he later came to express himself? What would have become of the life of Chinua Achebe, of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, if they never encountered books and encountered them at the age they did? What would have become of the life of Jeff Bezos without coming to read the way he read? What would have become of my life if I never stumbled upon books? Which brings me to a particular concern I've been having for a very long time. And that's the concern that books are very expensive, especially in a place like Nigeria, where almost everything is being traded in dollars. One begins to ask himself, how do people really buy books? How do they read? I know before I turned 20, it was very, very crazy in terms of how much I can dole out and try to want to get books. I remember my uncle, Joel, and he used to ask me, why is your budget so so expensive? Like, why do you have so much things on your budget and yet they look so little? Because predominantly they were occupied by the fact that I needed to get books. I needed to get books not in Naira, I needed to get books in foreign currency. And it's the case for a whole lot of persons. Those who cannot afford books either stumble and leave themselves on online platforms, or they get PDF versions of these books, whether authorized or not authorized, and they have to find one way or the other to get to like read their way through and read their way out of their current misery and their current sorrow. And it's the case for a whole lot of persons, in as much as publishing houses are not made available or have not been given the chance to get to flourish because of the wrong policies we have back home. It will continually be a problem, so that you find a book for as high as $40. It might not be so expensive. $40 is even still expensive for somebody in America. Talk more of for somebody in Nigeria that has to convert that at about 1,700 naira, which is about the current price, the current exchange rate in a place like Nigeria. And if you do the conversion, you get to see the maths, and you see that ordinarily nobody in his right senses will want to get books worth such amount of money in recent time. And it brings to mind also the question, why will the selling of foreign currency and the exchange of such amount of money be a thing of lucrative interest and business in a place like Nigeria? And the answers are many, but it's a very, very miserable reality. A people whose purchasing power has been reduced to almost nothing sit down every day and clamor and look for means of getting to exchange money to get a security, but in trying to do that particular stuff, they tend to do themselves a disfavor. Because for every foreign transaction done between Nigeria and almost any other country that gets to want to see that the country gets to stay where it stays, there's a devaluation of the currency. For every purchase made in a foreign currency at whatsoever exorbitant exchange rate given to the country, the currency of the country gets to drop. But then, what becomes of writers? What becomes of creatives who ordinarily should have been given a better chance and the right chance to write? What becomes of them? I will tell you what happens to them. Seeing as the creative ordinarily needs an opportunity for such a person to flourish and grow his craft, sit down to read and sit down to research and sit down to write, which are prerequisites if somebody ordinarily want to consider himself a writer. You have to immerse yourself in reading and reading those who've come before you. You have to look at things from different perspectives. You have to have a roof over your head. You need to have food on your table. But with the current economic situations, you find out that many authors or potential authors would not get to actualize such potentialities because they would have to fend for themselves. They will have to always go back to the survivor mode. And so you will find them filling up their hearts and their times and their attentions with other frivolities, with other levels of habits ordinarily that would not see to it that their craft and their gifts get to be harnessed to the fullest. And you see such as these persons go down oblivion, go down quietly, go down silently with little or no recognition, with little or no motivation to get to continue. Because tell me, how can someone who has not fed, someone who hasn't had the luxury of having the security of an apartment, the security of a house, the security of food, come to sit down to critically think, critically write, when we know that these mental stuffs are things very, very demanding for the human brain and for the human mental makeup and frame of mind. And so you find writers in a place like my country continue to struggle, continue to dwindle, continue to hang around and see to it that they make sense of their life, but predominantly they struggle. And for those who struggle enough to even get an article published, you get to see the sheer joy in their heart. At the same time, the levels of sorrow and the way they feel bad because they pick up the works of their contemporaries in other countries. They get to see how valuable these works are and how simple these works were and how such could be made possible and published at ease, as opposed to their work, because they also find in themselves the possibility of being published like this. They also find in themselves the possibility of having works that ordinarily should make sense, that works that ordinarily should stand out, but the environment has not granted them such opportunities. And so you find Nigerian writers and you find writers from African descent almost always being published from publishers abroad. And you don't want to blame them. Why will you blame Chinua Achebe? If Chinua Achebe had not sent a thing like Tin Solar Pad abroad, what would have happened? If the publication of the African Writers series had not been done in partnership with the publishing house it got to partner with, what would have become of such a generation? What would have happened to the works of Ngugu wa Thiong'o? What would have happened to the works of Buchi Emecheta? What would have happened to the works of as many persons that got to be published under this? What would have happened to the poems of Senghor? What would have happened to the writings of these great men who have seen to it that we now come to have what we can relish and call an African canon? And so one begins to ask himself again, over the years, through thick and thin, how have we fared and how must we see ourselves going forward? How can we grow? It comes back to the same thing. It comes back to the very beginning of things, the economy. The economy of a place like Nigeria keeps a whole lot of things out of the reach of the normal person, out of the reach of the average Nigerian, out of the reach of the average African. And so for writers to ordinarily write, they have to do times 10 of what their contemporaries abroad get to do. We've not talked about power supply. We've not talked about the ability of getting research materials both online and offline. We've not talked about the possibility of getting to travel to different existing libraries if they exist in their numbers, a thing they still currently don't, how they would ordinarily get to feed. We've not talked about all of this, because when we talk about all of this and we put them in perspective, we get to see the challenges of the average writer back home. And so as they struggle and make strides to get published, they can only publish what their consciousness have come to absorb. They can only publish what their minds have come to tell them. They can only publish what their souls have granted them a chance to relish. And these things are many, but at the same time they are few. The platforms and the opportunities to ordinarily get to do this are both demanding and at the same time not. and at the same time not made available to them, readily available at ease. And so they continue to survive. They continue to survive. Gigs are not also being made. Creatives ordinarily should look at ways of getting to share their ideas. What would have happened to the works of J.R.R. Tolkien if he never had conversations in the Icklings about the possibility of him getting published, and what became the Lord of the Rings? What would have happened to C.S. Lewis, the Chronicle of Narnia, and the other works he got to publish? Surprised by Joy and every other thing he got to publish and give down to us before he left this sometimes sad and sometimes happy world of ours. It falls down to that particular stuff. And so going forward and looking at our lives into the future, we have to channel the energy and the attention to the right sources. A ministry of education that cannot bestow education shouldn't be called a ministry. A ministry of youth that ordinarily doesn't seek the welfare of the youths and doesn't know that a thing like a reading culture, the availability of literature materials for young creatives can champion in the world and in the society the much needed progress we ordinarily don't have, but we ordinarily stand in dear need of. A president who ordinarily doesn't come to understand that the budget of the country as done in the National Assembly is a thing that ordinarily should reflect the many places it ordinarily should reflect, as opposed to getting expensive cars, throwing luxurious parties and changing private jets as a thing I as a person still don't even come to understand. So that the country that is currently in the current financial reality and situation a place like Nigeria is should have sought to slash the salaries of its ministers and various politicians holding different political offices. But that is not the case, because we are in a place like Nigeria, and things ordinarily will not work. And so we will continue to see books placed at the price they get placed for international buyers. But then you won't ordinarily come to blame the publishers for keeping things at that price, because it ordinarily was supposed to be an international sale. And so if anybody wants to buy a thing like that from whatever they want to buy, they ordinarily would either have to play by the international price. So that our leaders have a lot of work to do. So that our leaders ordinarily should come to know that places that ordinarily needs to get grant need to be funded. So that a place like creative hubs and creative centers and public libraries still remains a strange thing and a strange reality to people in a place like my country. So that we begin to tell ourselves that it is not in and about the fact that we are not creative, or no, it is not in and about that we cannot win the Nobel Prize. It is not in and about that we cannot win the Nobel Prize of Physics, and or that we cannot get awards for ourselves, and we cannot become scientists, engineers, novelists, poets, writers, literary critics, and all that. But it is the case that we have been badly governed. We live in a time, in a space, and governed by our brothers and sisters who don't care about us. It is not like the world has really cared about the average man. It is not like the elites have almost always had the people in mind. But there are climes and there are countries we could ordinarily look up to. As bad as situations are, there are countries ordinarily that still champion reading, that still champion the cause for literacy, that still believe in the sense of education. No matter how bleak and no matter how brittle such ideas still stands in the world, it still remains that there are people who are still struggling and championing the right cause of education. We as a people also need to be having this conversation. It is not every year we ask ourselves, when is it coming to Africa next? When is it coming to Africa next? How easy have the climb and the continent made writing possible for writers, made life suitable for people to ordinarily sit down and tell themselves, I want to research about a particular place and I want to write about it in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I want to be left alone to pursue a particular project, and at the end, it is going to be for the good of the culture. It is going to be for the good of the people. The few publishing houses back home are actually trying. Masobe is there. The Cassava Republic is trying its own best. So that when Okada books shut down, I felt pained. But why wouldn't it shut down as many other persons get to shut down? They need funding. They need all the things they ordinarily can find within their space. They need all the support they can get. And you cannot blame and put everything on the government. We also as a people coming new to these new forms of publication and new forms of literature as opposed to our traditional way of transferring things orally need to come to tell ourselves that our lifestyles also need to change. Because people every day and every week, you find them in places like Vanity. You find them in places like Kubana. You find them in different beer parlors and different hotels. You find people also getting to spend their money and their life in luxurious clothes and in buying of luxurious merchandise. Most of them they don't even need. You get to see the phones we get to use. You get to see the places we prioritize also as a people. It is not in and about every time we get to blame the government. Our purchasing power and the things we ordinarily need and the type of lifestyle we've also adopted over the years have also come to stifle our progress, have also come to stifle the way we see things, the way we go about them, the way we come to understand realities, and the way our reality in turn have come to be presented to us, have come to us into the current situation we find ourselves. Because in as much as we channel our attention to the things we don't need necessarily, or the things we need but not in the proportion we get to take them, we will continue to make these mistakes. Publishing should be a collective venture. Reading should be a collective venture. It is not a thing to be left to the writer alone. The writer cannot be the writer and the reader. The writer cannot carry out and champion the need for a revamp in literature alone. He has to write while reading other works, while reading himself also, but he cannot do that alone. He cannot just tell himself, I want to write and I want to write for myself and I want to write and read for myself. The desire to write is the desire geared towards the fact that you want to be read. You want other persons to get to read you. You want a dialogue. You want a level of communication. You want to have a conversation with somebody, a group of people, whether it's tied towards a niche or not. But there's always a politics under every layer of writing. There's always a particular ideology. There's always a particular message, or there are groups of ideologies and ideas one get to find when a writer picks a pen and joins such to a paper. And so when we tell ourselves that, we don't have books, we should ask ourselves, what have our fathers and mothers done to ordinarily challenge the current situation of the country? What have our brothers and sisters done to see to it that we make life a bit easier? What have we as a people done to see to it that a thing like writing doesn't go out of extinction? Because when Dostoevsky was writing, he never wrote having in mind that I would read him. He was broke as hell. But he had it in mind that he can champion this thing and he can put them down to paper. When Leo Tolstoy was writing, he never had me in mind. When Mark Twain was writing, he never dreamt of me. That is the beauty of books. Look at all these authors here. They never believed I will sit down here in this space and get to look at their works and get to try to read their works. But that's what's happening. That is the power of the transmission of ideas. I never met Isaiah Berlin, but I enjoy his philosophy. I never met Ken Saro-Wiwa. But all that has come down to us as his works are the things I get to do and I get to read. I have never met a lot of persons. I've never met Ngugu or Tiongo personally. But I will be very happy to do. But at the same time, I have read all the stuff he has put out there as a literary work. How many persons have met Chinua Achebe? How many persons met Chinua Achebe while he was alive? But how many persons are meeting him day by day in the works he has written? How many persons have met Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie physically? But they get to relish her work as they come to find them. How many persons know that a person like Okonkwo is not actually a real human being, but a character in Things Fall Apart? How many persons really get to meet their authors who are very dear to them? How many persons have met the current Nobel Prize awardee, Han Kang? But a lot of persons have read her Vegetarian, if not before, at least now, after she was announced the winner. She has had millions of sales ever since she got pronounced, adding to other international awards she has gotten before. It goes down to that particular stuff we've been talking before. There's a power and there's a politics that ordinarily we need to revamp and bring back to life if we as a people must come to change the situation of our country. If we as a people would ordinarily love to come to change our life. Yesterday I met an 18-year-old girl who told me she was reading Nietzsche's work, and that's Antichrist, and she was fascinated by the way Nietzsche tried tackling religion during the course of his life, and she was quoting from the very beginning the idea of come be with me on top of the mountain and get to see the world for what it ordinarily is. And one begins to ask himself, when Nietzsche was writing that particular work, Nietzsche never had it in mind that a Muslim girl would come up to pick his work and try to read it and try to understand it. But many years after he died, a girl, a Muslim for that matter, is picking up his work and is reading his work and is trying to make sense of religion as she tries to navigate her religion in relation to other religions. And you get to ask yourself, what more can be more valuable to a people than the preservation of this particular way of doing things? What more can be more valuable if we have archives where we can go and look up works of people gone before us? How much can we spend in things we don't need until we see the need to start building libraries on every street, libraries on every community, libraries in every community we get to find ourselves. Libraries in our houses, because sometimes we tell ourselves, oh, our kids don't read, there's no reading culture. But we are the same parents that get to buy our kids and our children every other thing than books. We are the parents who give our kids laptops at age sometimes I don't even understand, and introduce them to social media and give them expensive and sophisticated gadgets, as opposed to the possibility of saying, can I buy you? You don't even ask them you want to buy them a book. Which book do you want to read? Because in doing this, we don't know the next big thing we are ordinarily getting to build in our life and in our space. We don't. We have this culture of buying merchandise and clothes for them to appease them, but we don't want to challenge them mentally, and we want them all of a sudden to just figure out things for themselves. We want them to become so intelligent and so bright, whereby we ourselves as a people are not ordinarily challenging ourselves. We as parents, how often do we read? You as an uncle, when was the last time you gave a book to your brother's children, as to your nephews and your nieces? When was the last time you donated books to an organization? When was the last time you had the thought of championing literacy? Not literacy for financial gains, literacy for what it ordinarily is and what it ordinarily is supposed to be. So that I ask these questions, and you have all the right to be offended if you want to be offended, but it doesn't take anything away from the crux of the matter that we as a people collectively must come to see to it that we make sense of our life. The lawyer cannot do it alone, the banker cannot do it alone, the accountant cannot do it alone, the surgeon cannot do it alone, the engineer cannot do it alone, the mason cannot do it alone, the crane operator cannot do it alone, the lecturer cannot do it alone, the writer cannot do it alone, readers even cannot do it alone. The economy of a particular people and the level of comfort they get to find in life sometimes determines how they go about the possibility of reading and the possibility of writing. And so as we started from the very perspective that things are being very, very expensive, that books are very expensive, and they are not becoming cheap anytime soon. One, they won't be cheap because we will not come to have organizations that ordinarily want to subsidize publication. Two, our attention spans have been taken away to something else, so that even in the presence of books for most persons, they still don't find the need and the flair to read. And let us stop saying people don't want to read. Write a book, people will read. People have been giving lots of reviews of Michael Chidoze's Loss is an Aftertaste of Memory. People have been reading his works. People have been gobbing a whole lot of stuff from literary magazines online, because sometimes that's the only way they can go. That's even for the privileged few that even come to have regular data supply to their phones, or even come to have the network, even the necessary bandwidth for them to get to explore the internet. So that things are ordinarily not taking the shapes they should take, because our leaders have been very responsible. And it starts with our leaders, and I tell you why. There's nothing that can happen in a country when the leaders don't have the people at heart, when the leaders have not ordinarily come to look at life. If you look at the poem by Dike Chukwumerije, Fix the Politics, he says, the politician in office hold the yam and the knife. What we elect is to give the elected the power over life. But that's the truth. He continued, he said, the politicians in office hold the farm and the seed. For to elect is to give the elected the power to decide whatsoever they want to decide how they want to see life go, to decide how we must grow, to decide a whole lot of things. They decide the policies, they decide everything they get to do. And it says, no matter your education, qualification, or achievement, you are subject to the mentality of those in government. No matter the protest you stage, no matter the grammar you speak, nothing can save you from those elected to make and enforce our laws. Because the way they see things, he continues, is a world around you. Because you cannot drive faster than the person driving you. And so if we must fix this, we must start from the right source. It is not enough to have a minister for education. It's not enough to have a minister for health. It is not enough to have a minister for poverty alleviation. It is not enough to have a minister for road transport. It is not enough to have a minister of the FCT. It is not enough to have the minister for agriculture. It is not enough to have the minister of all the ministries we have in a place like Nigeria, without ordinarily getting to look at the level of education of such people. Because if such people don't come to feed themselves and their souls and their minds and their bodies with the necessary information needed to champion growth and development, the country would perpetually remain in the stage and in the state it is, if not even becoming worse. So that the system, as the Amajiri system in a place like Nigeria, should be something that ordinarily should have been long abolished without even thinking of wanting to please the North or not in the name of political correctness and what have you. Because tell me, which child will want to remain Amajiri or become someone better? Which child will want to sit down and carry bowls every day and beg for money for some selfish individuals, both from their family members who ordinarily get to allow such stuff to happen, to those who get to champion such things in the name of an ideology? So that a system like that ordinarily should have been put to stop a long time ago. So that as many persons who want to go to school will be given a chance to go to school. These persons who continually remain ignorant, who continually remain illiterate, by our own will and by the policies we get to make, would become the problems of the country tomorrow. Alongside we ourselves who claim to be very educated. And come to think about it, those who continually steal money day in, day out, are not your father and my father in the village, are not your brothers and sisters who live in rural areas. Those who have come to steal the coffers of the country, those who have come to empty the purse of the nation, our brothers and sisters, our friends and family members, who have ordinarily in one way or the other come to be called exposed, who at least can travel to Abuja, who at least can leave the village and go to the local government headquarters, who can print their names and submit for elections, those who have certificates, those who have masters, those who have PhDs, professors and what have you, academics, those in the academic world, men and women who ordinarily call themselves civilized, who call themselves men and women up to date with reality. These are the people that have stolen the country away. These are the people that have continually made things the way they are. And so you find a people, particularly those in the last dispensation of the last century, who ordinarily had free meal tickets, who ordinarily had free beds to get to sleep in, who never cared about the possibility of paying school fees when schools were just open, who benefited from one scholarship scheme or the other, who have traveled out of the country and the continent under schemes and under platforms that made it possible for them to ordinarily become who they are today. We find such people as those who have ordinarily come to shut down, who have come down to shut down the same roads that led them to where they are today. They are the people who've come down to burn the bridges that would perpetually prevent others to want to come to function and want to come to grow and want to come to do better for themselves. As such, we must look at the root cause of the problem. Passenger said in one of his songs, and I say this a whole lot, you can only buy what you have been sold. You can only buy what you have been sold. And many persons have not been sold a lot of things. Many persons have not been sold the right ideas. And like good ideas, and like bad ideas, where there are no good ones, the bad ideas get to take the forefront of things. And that is what we've come to see. That is what we have come to have as our reality. We as a people, we as a collective, we as a group of individuals who ordinarily are interested in the advancement of the world, a thing I believe very few persons really do, should come to look at the magic in literature, should come to look at the far-reaching possibility of a thing like getting published, especially in the 21st century, where with a platform like Amazon and different forms of getting to read from Kindles and all that, one can have an impact in a child, in a man, in a woman, in a society, as far as different from the continent where such a person is. These are many more the things we don't look at. These are many more the things we ordinarily have to come to tell ourselves. And for gatekeepers who ordinarily get to mount gates, gatekeepers who I believe sometimes are failed authors, failed writers, who sit down there and pontificate on who should be published and who shouldn't be published, I make do to say, please make life easy for those who want to get published. Make things easy and don't write people off. Have a chance to heal yourself and face reality squarely. Because if the likes of the many persons who have come down to us as writers, if somebody like J.K. Rowling never got to be published after many rejection and probably gave up and then just died, what would have become of the story we now have as Harry Potter? And the many other fascinating stuff we've come down to have from her. What would have become of Chimamanda if somebody never took a chance and say, I will give you a trial, I'll give you an opportunity, and I'll give you a chance to get published. And so for gatekeepers, it remains a thing to know that you are not the writers. You are the ones that get to provide the money for publications. We know you're the ones that get to bring about sensitivity readers, that get to bring about the chance of certain persons getting published. You're the ones that sometimes get to employ the editors and get to employ the reviewers. You're the ones that probably get to fund publishing houses and all that. But if ideas ordinarily rule the world, the thing I believe ideas do, we should give ourselves the chance and agency to ordinarily give other persons the agencies they need to get published. A thing we barely do, a thing we seldomly do. So that if someone like Dostoevsky had not been given the chance such a person was given in the course of one's life, one would ordinarily have come to ask himself, how would someone like our generation fared without the existential works we get to find? If someone like John Steinbeck never wrote, what would have become of literature as it concerns his life? If someone like Chinua Achebe never wrote, if someone like Shakespeare never sat down to give us the beautiful works we have down there, if people have not sat down and told themselves, we have to dream about the great American novel, what would have our life ordinarily become as it concerns the pursuit for literature and as it concerns the pursuit for keeping criticism and criticizing the society and keeping them in check become in the 21st century? And so as we continue to see literature become a thing of politics, as we continue to see the politics in the writing, as we continue to see people ordinarily getting to do a whole lot of things wrong than do them right in terms of publication, we have to call ourselves to questions and ask ourselves, how can people get published if capitalism makes it difficult for creatives to sit down and ask themselves of the real need to write? Because if you don't have shelter over your head and you don't have food over your head, you want to go look for a regular job. I was having a conversation while I was recording an interview yesterday with a physicist, and he was telling me about how people give up their scientific goals and their dreams because sometimes you just need basic living amenities like a house, like somebody to share time and love with, like kids, like families. And sometimes because of the strenuous environment you get to find yourself in the scientific world and the very demanding task of really being a scientist in the 21st century, you find yourself drifting apart. You find yourself almost not coming to have the need to write, almost not coming to have the desire to want to do what you ordinarily should be doing. It is like that for almost every walk of life, that those who ordinarily do the most important jobs, like those who build our roads and those who fix our pipes and plumbers who come to attend to our needs at home, and electricians who get to fix our electric problems, and those who get to sweep the roads, and many others who get to do different things, from janitors to our chefs to waiters and waitresses to barbags and bartenders to runners and to our cleaners and to even our professors. People like this don't really come to be appreciated for the invaluable gift they are to humanity. And so we see society placing values and priorities in places they ordinarily shouldn't place, so that people ordinarily begin to look at we being very communitarian as a crime. And so people begin to coil and begin to look at life from an individual perspective. People begin to become very, very individualistic because that is how we have come to tell ourselves that we ordinarily need to flow, and we ordinarily need to go, and we ordinarily need to grow. And so as books continue to be very expensive, particularly in regions where they are not made readily available, in countries where places like Amazons have not established companies around such places or headquarters or branch offices, in countries and in regions torn up by war, torn up by conflict, my heart goes out to them, because how would they read when they are facing the most strenuous of life challenges within themselves? When was the last time you sat down and asked yourself? When was the last time kids in Palestine actually sat down to want to read? When was the last time children in Ukraine, those who stay back, sat down really to want to read? Because they don't. In as much as our world is not safe, and our world is not peaceful, and our world is not doing the things ordinarily they should do, we will continue to see books written about Israel, written about Palestine, written about the Gaza Strip, written about Iran, written about Lebanon and all that, but not from a positive light, from the wars and the turmoils that have come down to be the reality of such a place. But nobody would sit down to ordinarily write about the beauty of a place like Iran 60, 70, 80 years ago, of the peace we all dream of the peace we ordinarily want, but we ordinarily cannot get, because we as a people have failed ourselves almost irretrievably, because we as a people have done ourselves so much harm as opposed to good. And so I begin to ask myself, and as I want you to also ask yourself, what are the things we can do well to make sense of our existence as opposed to doing it wrong? What are the things we can do to function well? I don't have all the answers. I believe you also don't. But the basic things have to start where they have to start from. Kids have to be given the chance to experience literature. Parents also have to make this environment possible. Policies also need to be set in place to see to it that a thing like writing, and a thing like reading, and a thing like creating new worlds and creating new ideas continue to be a reality now into the future. Because it matters what we think, it matters how we think. It matters how we go about things. It matters how we make progress. And so the current crop of youths, poorly educated or badly misinformed, the current crop of people we now breed and bring into this world and tell them that reality is a different thing as opposed to what ordinarily it should be. This group of people are the ones that are ordinarily going to be the problems of the future. Because if somebody doesn't really come to give himself a right course of thinking and a right course of going about life and doing things, such a person remains a threat to himself, to herself, to themselves into the future. And the world is not ready for the level of unrest and restlessness it will come to face in the near future with the current crop of politics and geopolitics you get to play across boards and across positions, and the different stands it ordinarily gets to take. And so as the society continues to be very confused as to where to go, what to do and what not to do, we have a duty. And that duty revolves around growing together, growing strong, growing tall, standing tall where we ordinarily need to stand tall, and doing the things ordinarily we need to do and we must do to continue to function, to continue to grow. Because it matters what we think. It matters how we go about these things. It matters how we come to function as a people. The solutions are one and there are many. It starts with fixing the politics. It starts with fixing our policies. It starts with fixing our life. It starts with growing strong and growing tall and growing together. Outside of this, I don't know how we want to make progress. Outside of this, I don't see us making the necessary progress we ordinarily need to make. And so we must sit back and reflect. Reflecting into the many dangers, into the many harms we've done to ourselves, to our kids, to ourselves into the future. We started from the high cost of publications. We started from the politics that is the publishing houses in most cases. We started from the need to give creatives a chance to really come to be very creative and come to think about life and think about themselves. I am Biringkpa. See you next time.